Welcome to PodAud series of Indian podcasting revolution, where your hosts Roshni and Rohit audit, review, and give a shout out to some noteworthy Indian podcasts.
In this podcast audit, we do not critique the shows, but applaud the efforts of the independent podcasters and suggest improvements.
And not only that, this also gives an opportunity to podcast listeners find great shows to binge on. So listen on and let's jump into today's PodAud. This is the very first episode of PodAud on Indian podcasting revolution. And which podcast we are reviewing today, Rohit?
We are reviewing Moolah Talks by the hosts Meeta, Gupta, and Ritu, Prasad. And this is going to be an exciting one because then the kind of podcast it is so insightful. It is so sharing a lot of wisdom around finance. And this is exciting one because then I can just imagine one of the scene like women often carry the keys of the cupboards or the locker along with them. So how important is to talk about finances for the women and how they can learn to manage their finances and everything around that. So this is something that I always wanted to talk about. And here we are today reviewing and auditing this particular show.
Yes, that's why I love this show because it is so specifically talking to women over 30. And these are not women who are victimized or they feel sorry for themselves. These are actually confident, assertive women who want to take charge of their money, who want to understand about money management, finance management, and take charge of it. And if we review the podcast in a very strategic way and look at its concept, the thing I'd like about it is that they are not at all talking about the difficult and complicated jargons of the finance industry. They are actually making themselves very relatable by sharing their personal stories. In fact, that is something which is very unique about a finance-based podcast, that it is more leaning towards storytelling. The hosts Meeta and Ritu are extensively sharing their personal stories, stories from media, stories for, in fact, their community members. And this is what actually hits a nail on the head with the audience also, because the women who are listening to this show will find it highly relatable. And what's best is that this entire storytelling is also supported by audio storytelling. So if you see the trailer of this podcast, it has so much of influence and mention of movie music, right? So at one point of time, Meeta is narrating her story that her husband acted more like Shah Rukh Khan of Mehuna, and again a sound effect of Mehuna signature music comes in. So I love the aspect of integrating audio storytelling as well in the entire show. So while at one end we are focusing on educating women and helping them become aware about finance, we are also making it a little bit more fun and more interesting to hear about this story. Yeah, but one thing which I strategically find is somewhat not aligning with the usual formats of shows and podcasts that is out there is that the trailer of this particular show goes up to 7 minutes, which actually could pass on as an episode itself. Usually podcast trailers are recommended to be around 60 to 90 seconds. This one is a little bit longer, but I think what keeps the audience engaged and hooked on is the audio storytelling. So yeah, that's from my side on the high level show concept and strategy that I observed about this particular podcast. What about you, Rohit? What are your observations about Moolah Talks?
So I have been listening to this particular podcast since a long time because then my area of expertise or the core work I am into always deals around the finance and taxation part. So it is always fascinating to learn more about finance, and especially for women, because then content structure of this particular show is right on to the point, because then it takes into consideration a lot of things. Like if we talk about the social conditioning, the challenges, the decisions on the various stages that a woman has to take, it is something that you won't find often, because then women always hesitate to talk about this particular thing. So whom to approach? because then there will be certain kind of a questions like why you are asking this, what do you want to do about learning these kind of concepts. So it is something that like if you're able to know through, or like if you're able to learn from these particular episodes, then you are just able to know like how to manage your finances. So that is something which is very great thing. Now if we are talking about the questions, it has been a great conversation with like the host. Okay, so they have the kind of a tempo, they have the kind of a match, so that the kind of exchanging of thoughts is happening, it is quite natural. So what I feel is like the whatever way they are putting efforts into providing wisdom onto that particular topic is happening really good. So the kind of duration they are having for the episode, the kind of planning they are doing, the questions, it just open up the conversation, and you can ask yourself a lot of questions through that. And when you are answering, on when you are like asking more questions to it, you are on a quest to find a lot of research material, so that this podcast can always give out through the particular medium as well, is what I feel. So that is something we can always think about.
So, yeah, I agree to you, Rohit, that the content structure is very well laid out for Moolah Talks. And what I also feel is that ultimately, the important aspect for any podcast is that what is the ROI for the listener? If they are investing their time, what is the value that they are getting? And I feel that this is a very good duration of episodes that they are having in this podcast, because it is somewhere on an average of 20 minutes each episode. And I think it's a very good investment for any woman to just tune into this podcast for 20 minutes and get to learn so much about how women across the world are facing same challenges, because with shared experiences of women that Meeta and Ritu are sharing, there is a high relatability quotient with the hosts. They do not come across as some lofty experts, but instead, they are very approachable females who have walked the same course of life, who faced the same challenges. And now, based on their experiences and challenges faced, they took a step towards making themselves and other women financially free. The format of the show is a conversational podcast where the hosts are talking amongst themselves, very much like what we are doing right here. But yeah, I would really like conversational podcasts to be very free flowing. They should never be scripted, kind of a thing. That's what I feel in terms of how to package a show. So, in terms of packaging of show, this comes across as a very relatable show. That's what my feeling is. What about you? What are some of the other observations you had about this show?
If I have to talk about the effectiveness of the podcast, the strategies, the marketing, and the presence on the extending media platforms, I feel that there is a lot of scope for that particular thing. Because then, see, we as a founders, we as the podcasters, or anything that comes across, we are having a busy life. But then, if we want to spread out our word, then it is very important to get to that particular listener or get to that particular reader. So how are we doing that? So if a person is listening to your podcast, how many of them are interacting through the DMs, through the reviews, through the feedbacks, or the social media post? Because then, see, I don't say that we want a kind of a listener from that particular social media post, but then having that kind of a recognition that yes, these are the people who are the podcasters and are hosting their show into this particular niche will again boost their confidence and will keep them going, because more and more people are wanting to learn through the medium of podcasting. So if they are much active through their particular social media channels or like talk about this particular thing, I feel that that will fairly add to the kind of a worth of their show. So that is something that they can expect. And the brand is built through the personal brand. Okay, like the presence a founder or the host can have through that particular podcast. So if they are the people who are going to talk more about it, I feel that more and more people will be able to relate with the kind of content they are creating for their podcast. So that is something I feel. And as we are moving ahead with the kind of a charts, if we happen to search on the like podcast directories of the Apple podcast or something like that, if you're searching for women empowerment or like women talking about the finances, I can see this show ranking into that particular category amongst the 100 of the shows that are into the same category. So that is something which is very unique, and it happens through the kind of unique content you create, the unique proposition you have for the show. Because a woman creating a show around finance, around money, and that too into a kind of a educating category, it is something.
And that too in a non-jargony way.
Yes, that is very important. Like that point has to be highlighted. And so that is the reason they are more searchable. And the word moolah, this is something which is very uncommon. That makes it special.
So, yeah, that was the observations that we had about this particular show. And for listeners of this episode, do check out Moolah Talks on your podcast listening app, because it is a show which has created a very unique identity for itself. It has recently completed its first season. So the first season is of 6 episodes and very easy to binge on. 6 episodes you can easily binge on. And so let's play the intro of Moolah Talks for our listeners to get an experience of what the show is about. We cannot play the full trailer because, like we said earlier, the trailer is very long. So we are playing the episode intro for the benefit of listeners of PodAud.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Hello and welcome to this episode of Moolah Talks. We are your hosts, Ritu Prasad
and Meeta Gupta, and together we invite you to travel this journey of attaining financial freedom with us.
So what do we want from you? As a woman, we want you to take charge of your own life and feel financially independent and secure. And if that is your goal, then join us in this exciting and fulfilling journey towards your own financial awareness and well-being.
In this podcast, we will be having conversations around mindsets that we as women have had over years of social conditioning, our fears about money, the power dynamics that managing money brings, and as a result, the financial challenges, mistakes, and decisions that we as women make.
We will also be talking about how we can gradually overcome these challenges and start being aware of our own finances and managing them with more confidence and ease.
This is a Moolah Talks podcast, and now let's begin today's episode.
We hope you will like the podcast we have reviewed on today's PodAud and will head over to it to give it a listen. By the way, if you want your podcast to be audited by us, just fill the application form link in the show notes.
And yes, thank you so much for being here today. Do send us DM on Instagram at TFY Podcast if you follow Indian Podcasting Revolution. And if you are yet to follow, what are you waiting for? Follow it now and join us next week for yet another episode. These are your hosts, Roshni and Rohit, signing off.